Hello and welcome to the WION-VOA Co-Production with me, Alison LaGrange. Now let's start with our first story. In his first full week in office, President Joe Biden has focused on reversing multiple Trump administration policies and unveiling plans to address the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the economy, immigration and climate change. Michelle Quinn reports on how the flurry of new policies and actions may be received by a deeply divided country.
January Day,
President Joe Biden came to office on January 20 with a message to unify the nation.
With unity, we can do great things, important things.
In his first full week in office, Biden, a Democrat, has upended many policies enacted by his Republican predecessor, Donald Trump, on energy policy, foreign policy, immigration, and other areas. Most fulfilled Biden campaign promises, but Senator Marco Rubio expressed a view shared by fellow Republicans when he criticized what he called Biden's executive fiats.
We now have a president who talks like a centrist, but is governing from the far left.
Some observers say Biden's actions signal that his administration will make a hard pivot from the Trump presidency.
It's a signal of really moving in a different direction than the previous administration, and obviously that's not going to come without some level of division.
Biden says he supports the second impeachment trial of Trump, which is set to take place in the Senate on February 9th. The House impeached Trump alleging incitement of insurrection for his actions leading up to the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. Trump has defended his actions and denounced the violence that took place that day. But Senate Democrats insist Trump must be held accountable. Biden's call for unity seeks to rally a nation over a shared set of democratic values, even as he implements sweeping policy changes that anger many Republicans. Republicans may accuse Biden of seeking to cancel his predecessor's legacy. Democrats accused Trump of the same 4 years ago. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
And to speak more about the details of U.S. President Joe Biden's first week in office, we go to the Voice of America's Elizabeth Lee in Los Angeles, California. Thanks for being with us, Elizabeth. Now, Mr. Biden has been quite busy in his first days in office. What are some of the executive actions signed by the new U.S. president? And furthermore, what are the domestic and international implications of these orders?
Well, President Joe Biden has been in office for over a week and has already signed a myriad of new executive orders meant to reverse the actions of former President Donald Trump and reshape many of the nation's policies. Before taking office, Biden promised to introduce new measures to fight the coronavirus crisis, reform immigration and climate policies, and push for economic relief. Now, first, the pandemic, which is President Biden's most pressing domestic issue. He has developed a plan, including encouraging Americans to mask up during the first 100 days of the Biden administration. It also promises to increase vaccine access by creating new community centers and ramping up distribution to achieve the goal of vaccinating 100 million Americans in the first 100 days of his administration. On the economy, Biden has unveiled a $1.9 trillion corona relief package in the days leading up to his inauguration. The bill includes adding a new round of stimulus payments for qualifying Americans, extending unemployment benefits to those who cannot work because of COVID-19, and extending the nationwide restrictions on home evictions and foreclosures. The bill now needs to gain enough support from Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate to pass, so he is trying to push that through Congress. On immigration, in the first 48 hours of his presidency, Biden signed executive orders to strengthen the Obama-era program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It allows work for undocumented immigrants who entered the U.S. as children. Biden also ended Trump's border wall construction at the U.S.-Mexico border. Then there is the issue of climate change. President Biden signed a package of executive orders elevating climate change at every level of the federal government. Former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been named the climate czar as President Biden's international climate change envoy. Kerry says he hopes to see the U.S. announce new, more ambitious emissions targets at or before a summit that Mr. Biden intends to host on April 22nd, which is Earth Day. Analysts say Kerry's appointment is a signal that climate change issues will have a prominent place in Biden's foreign policy. The new administration has already declared that it would rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. And as former President Barack Obama's Secretary of State, Kerry has helped negotiate the global climate accord, bringing China to the table at the UN climate conference in Paris. Then the deal was, of course, rejected by President Donald Trump. But Kerry does face some challenges. At home, he's getting pushback from the oil and gas industry, and critics are concerned with the jobs that will be lost. Kerry says new green jobs will be created. Internationally, there's uncertainty about whether Biden's climate commitments can survive the U.S.'s intensely divided politics. Kerry is on the White House's National Security Council climate, and military experts say they expect there will be growing conflicts around the world as climate change increases competition for natural resources. Some say there is a lack of U.S. readiness to protect military installations and overall infrastructure from worsening flooding and other natural disasters as temperatures rise. Allison, all the signals that climate change will be an important part of foreign policy and the national security decisions in the U.S.
Right. Elizabeth, now, while President Biden is busy in the White House, the U.S. Senate is also preparing for the upcoming impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump and the storming of the U.S. Capitol that led to Mr. Trump's impeachment, his second one. Now, can you update us on the investigation and just give us a preview of what is expected in this upcoming impeachment trial?
Yes, the investigation on the assault at the U.S. Capitol on January 6 continues, and more than 400 suspects have been identified by federal authorities. It is expected that some of those linked to the attack will face sedition charges. The charges could carry a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The armed attack was aimed at disrupting Congress's counting of President Joe Biden's state-certified electoral victory as the U.S. president. 5 people died in the assault, and more than 100 people have been arrested. The impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump will begin the week of February 8th. This siege at the U.S. Capitol led to the impeachment of Mr. Trump. The U.S. House of Representatives voted to impeach him, accusing him of inciting the insurrection by repeatedly claiming that he won the election. So the next step is a trial in the Senate to see whether he will be convicted, and the final verdict will be a political one. The upcoming impeachment trial is unusual in a number of ways. It's the first time a president has been impeached twice. It's also the first time a president has been tried after leaving office. Republicans say it's pointless to impeach Trump after he's left office. They argue Trump spoke forcefully, but the language wasn't any harsher than regular political speech. Now, a vote of 2/3 of the Senate is required to convict, and we'll get back to that in a minute. There's another unusual element in this, and that's instead of the Chief of Justice of the Supreme Court presiding over the trial, which is what happened in Trump's first impeachment, this time the longest-serving member of the Democratic majority, Senator Patrick Leahy, will be presiding over the trial because the U.S. Constitution calls for the Chief Justice to preside only over trials of sitting presidents. Republican Senator Rand Paul proposed a motion to declare the trial unconstitutional because Trump has already left office, but that was rejected in a vote of 55 to 45. The vote suggests Trump may be acquitted because a 2/3 majority, as mentioned before, or at least 67 votes are needed for conviction. And more than a third of the chamber voted that the trial is unconstitutional. Democrats are pushing for the trial because if convicted, it could possibly bar Mr. Trump from running for office again. Biden says impeachment has to happen, despite the possibility that it could hinder him politically and his push for legislation to tackle issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis.
Right now, Elizabeth, stay with us while we move on to our next report, and then I'll be coming straight back to you. Less than a week into Joe Biden's presidency, sweeping changes are underway at the Pentagon as the new U.S. president and the new Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin look to undo changes made by former President Donald Trump. WION national security correspondent Jeff Selden has more.
Thank you very much for being here.
Flanked by top military officials, President Joe Biden, with the stroke of a pen, undid one of his predecessor's more divisive policies, a ban on transgender individuals serving in the military.
And what I'm doing is enabling all qualified Americans to serve their country in uniform.
On Twitter, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin praised the move, calling it not only the right thing, but the smart thing to do. Monday's executive order is just the latest step by the new administration to help the U.S. military change course, since Austin first arrived at the Pentagon this past Friday, making good on a promise the secretary gave lawmakers a week earlier at his confirmation hearing.
I will fight hard to stamp out sexual assault and to rid our ranks of racists and extremists.
But making progress on the growing problem of extremism, evidenced by the number of former military members who took part in the siege of the U.S. Capitol, may be more difficult.
There's got to be greater awareness of what new recruits and active service members are doing online.
Yet Austin is facing down other challenges as well. Having promised to help with the U.S. response to the coronavirus pandemic, he has also been reaching out to key allies, while critical choices loom on what to do next in Iran and Afghanistan, where the number of U.S. troops is down to years-long lows, and in Africa, where the U.S. military footprint has also been shrinking. So too, there are heightened tensions with Russia, concerns about North Korea, Iran, and then there is China.
I would put China at the top. I see China as the preeminent threat. So in some cases, and American people and our friends around the world need to understand this, the Chinese have fielded systems that are as good or better than ours.
A lengthy to-do list for America's newest Secretary of Defense. Jeff Selden, VOA News, Washington.
Elizabeth, as seen in that report, China is one of the biggest threats to the U.S., according to the analyst. Now, former President Donald Trump took a different stance on China than his predecessor. What are the analysts saying about what they expect the Biden administration's approach to China to be?
Well, Alison, one of the most significant legacies of the Trump administration's foreign policy is a sharply confrontational relationship with China. In a Pew Research Center survey, roughly 2 out of every 3 Americans see China negatively. Trump has called COVID-19 the China virus. There's a trade war with China. So the Biden administration will have a hard time reversing course on Trump's China policy. Biden has already indicated his support for repatriating supply chains to the U.S. for critical goods, such as medical equipment and personal protective equipment, and for a Buy American policy in federal procurement. Some analysts say the Biden administration will want to reduce the Trump administration's confrontational attitude toward China and reset relations between the two nations. But that may be a challenge. China continues its aggressive stance in East China and most recently stepping up its military activities, flying warplanes near Taiwan. President Biden reaffirmed his commitment to Taiwan. Analysts say it's unlikely the new administration will dismantle anytime soon some of Trump's policies, such as the sweeping tariffs imposed by the previous administration. Analysts say what may be more likely is that Washington will try to enlist the European support for a joint response to China's trade practices and the internal repression of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other minorities in China. Analysts also say with the growing global power of China, South Asia is becoming more critical to U.S. foreign policy. Now, of course, it is home to the 2 nuclear powers, India and Pakistan. Trump was close to Indian Prime Minister Modi, and his administration recognized India, along with Australia and Japan, as key to restraining rising Chinese power in South Asia. Some analysts say if Biden does have a softer China policy, it could change and potentially weaken U.S. relations with India. As the new Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, emphasized the Defense Department's commitment to the U.S.-India major defense partnership, saying that it is built upon shared values and a common interest in ensuring the Indo-Pacific region remains free and open. Allison?
Right, Elizabeth, could you tell us some more about America's newest defense secretary and some of the other issues that he is expected to tackle both at home and abroad?
Well, Lloyd Austin is the son of a postal worker and a homemaker from the southern U.S. state of Georgia. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, New York in 1975, served more than 40 years in the Army. He led military operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. He retired from the Army as the commander of the U.S. Central Command in 2016. The four-star general is the first Black defense secretary in the history of the U.S. Domestically, Secretary Austin says he will tackle the problems of sexual harassment and assault in the military, another domestic issue. Many of those arrested after the riot at the Capitol have current or previous ties to the military. After Mr. Austin was confirmed, the White House announced the Biden administration will conduct a comprehensive threat assessment of domestic extremism across various national security agencies. As Secretary of Defense, he will be looking at different regions of the world. In Europe, Austin says he values Germany as a station for U.S. troops, which leads to speculation that he may reverse a decision by the Trump administration to pull troops out of that country. North Korea is another hotspot. During his presidential campaign, Biden repeatedly referred to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as a thug, tyrant, and a dictator. Biden has suggested he wouldn't meet Kim without progress on North Korea's denuclearization. Although the Biden administration hasn't yet decided on a North Korea strategy, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says the United States would consider using both diplomacy and increased pressure to convince North Korea to return to negotiations. Pyongyang is likely to test Biden and push for a return to the Obama-era policy of offering North Korea concessions in return for agreeing to negotiations. In a speech earlier this year, the North Korean leader called the United States his biggest main enemy. Then there's Iran. So the new Secretary of State Blinken has signaled the U.S. sanctions on Iran will remain in place for some time. Blinken says the U.S. is a long way from the point of fulfilling President Joe Biden's campaign pledge to rejoin the deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Trump said he quit this deal because it did not do enough to curb a range of objectionable behaviors by Iran, including attempts to develop nuclear weapons. Tehran has vowed to resist U.S. sanctions and has insisted that its nuclear program, Allison, is peaceful. Back to you.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. It's great to speak to you, as always, and thanks for bringing us all of the latest out of the USA. WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.